I am rolling.
All right.
At the close of the U.S. Civil War, the black population in the Kentucky counties of Bell, Harlan, Letcher, Floyd, and Pike averaged 2.34%. At the turn of the century, those numbers would change significantly with the rapid development of the region's coal fields.
If you look at that period, late 1800s, early 1900s, there basically were three types of coal communities. There are the coal camps, which were pretty rough areas, and the owners of the coal mines were not too concerned about the housing for their labor. These might be considered just shacks. Then you've got coal towns, a town where the manager, the owner of the mine, really tried to develop a community. It was not quite at the level of these large corporations who came in and put in what we describe as these model towns. Benham and Lynch, there was Wheelwright, Inland Steel was the operator of that. The L&N Railroad ran a spur up to what is now Cumberland, Kentucky. And immediately Wisconsin Steel came in and started building a town. Eventually this town was as we call it, a model town in a sense that it had all of the buildings and items that you would expect to find in a mature town. Probably about 500 or 600 houses initially. There were schools, there was a hospital, YMCA, company store. Of course, they put in the infrastructure necessary for coal mining with wash houses and tipples and so on. About 7 years later, in 1917, U.S. Steel had purchased property further up Looney Creek. U.S. Steel started building a town which became known as Lynch, Kentucky. Lynch was a much larger town. Lynch had close to 2,000 residents. These were complete communities. There were doctors and nurses at the hospital. There were very well qualified teachers in the schools.
Why build a model town? Why go to that expense? And there are several reasons for this. Number one, build a place that will attract and keep miners. The companies wanted to prevent unionization, so if you made the place as nice as you could and as attractive as you could, you wouldn't lose the social control that they prized so much. The late 1800s and early 1900s, there were huge strikes all across the United States. A strike means no production. No production means lost profit. If they can prevent unions and attract workers, 2 points. The whole point of the town was production and profit. And if you could create a system, and these towns were systems, that would keep production flowing and profits up, was not only good for your pocketbook, but for your career in the company. In terms of recruitment, the companies had what was called a judicious mixture, in which they tried to get equal numbers of European immigrants, of blacks from the South, and of native whites from the local area. And by doing this, they felt that they could also prevent unionization because they could pit these groups against one another.
And these were what you would call captured mines, because everything that came out of the mines was then sent to either Chicago for Wisconsin Steel or for U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh.
Our book is called African American Miners and Migrants, and so the question comes, why did African Americans come to these little towns back in the mountains that were hard to get to? And why did they leave their home places and come on what Tom and I have called the above ground railroad?
Most black folks who were living in those coal towns, working as miners, were not born or raised there, and the majority of those men were recruited from Alabama, and that was for a very specific reason, because there were coal mines in Alabama, and many of the companies that were setting up shop in Harlan County owned mines in Alabama, so they knew exactly where to get the labor. They also knew that most of the black coal mining labor in Alabama was being sourced from convict leasing.
Because of very racist behaviors. Blacks were often rounded up and falsely imprisoned, put on chain gangs, and then rented out for the sheriff's profit as labor.
So it was very easy and attractive to lure potential laborers to migrate to eastern Kentucky. It's the early 1900s. Alabama was a wretched environment in terms of just racial violence. So it wasn't just easy to get up and decide to migrate. So the companies sent labor agents to go get men. For example, in Lynch, there was this guy named Limehouse. White guy, they say that he was skinny and he used to wear a straw hat. He drove a truck that carried watermelon and sugarcane and corn, things like that, and men. And he would smuggle black men from Alabama, sometimes in the middle of the night, and bring them to Lynch. Once they'd work off whatever agreement they had with Limehouse, Limehouse would then agree to go back and get their wives and their children. So that's how many of the early families got there.
Well, in '41, my dad was working at Steel Mills pipe shop in Birmingham for U.S. Steel, and he left there and come up here to work in the mines. And later on, he brought his family up there. He had a wife and 3 kids, and so we came up here when I was 13 years old. It was long. In a car on old narrow roads, 35, 40 miles an hour. We left in the morning, Birmingham about 7, 8 o'clock, and got here about 9 or 10 at night. And drove into the city, well into Cumberland and Benham and Lynch, all of them combined, and all the lights and everything looked so pretty. Got up the next morning and looked out, couldn't see nothing but mountains. So I cried for about a week. I didn't like it.
I'm originally from Everett, Kentucky. I live in Cleveland, Ohio now. It's a small coal mining area where my dad worked in the coal mines there. And my mother worked as a housekeeper. My dad, he was born in Georgia, and his family moved to Kentucky. And that's where he married my mother. My mother was from Pennington Gap, Virginia, and they had 8 children. And that's where we lived until like 1954. I went to an all-black school from kindergarten to the 8th grade. I went to Everett's Black School. My kids, they couldn't fathom a one-room schoolhouse. So one year we took our kids to Kentucky and they saw the one-room schoolhouse. And my kids said, "This ain't nothing but a little box." But see, it wasn't that many children. You had one teacher taught 1 through the 8th grade. And after you got to high school in 9th grade, you went to Harlan. Roosevelt High School, that's where all the black kids from the different coal mining camps like Everett's, Verdia, High Splint, Clover Splint, all of those little small coal mining camps fed into one high school.
Well, this building that we're sitting in right now originally was the Lynch Colored School. But this is where all the blacks went to this school, Lynch Colored School. And like I say, even Benham, Kentucky, their blacks went here.
See, U.S. Steel owned the school. They brought the teachers in, they built the building, and the kids didn't have anything else to do but go to school. They had a truant officer. They would come down to these schools and check the list of the ones that didn't show up. And about 8:30, 9 o'clock, they were at your house checking on to see why the kids didn't go to school.
This building we're sitting in now, where I started 1st grade. Education was paramount. Our parents, our teachers, our clergy just insisted that we make education the #1 issue in our lives.
My name is Edgar James Moss, and I was born and reared in Benham. I now live in Newington, Connecticut. I am one of 13 children born to my parents Mr. and Mrs. Green and Ina Moss, who were both born in Alabama, and attended the East Benham School under the principalship of Mr. Joseph Alexander Matthews and his wife, Mrs. Ruth Matthews. And at that time, grades 1 through 6 were on the first floor of the building. Grades 7 through 12 were on the second floor of the building. I forget what it was. I did something, and Professor Matthews was going to kick me out of school. And I knew that that would not go over with Mr. Green Moss. So I begged and I pleaded with Fess, everybody called him Fess, not to kick me out of school. So every window in our school, I had to wash those windows inside and out to keep from being kicked out of school.
We're in Fleming, Kentucky, and this is the church, Corinth Baptist Church. Now, Elkhorn Coal Company, back in the early 20s, they built the whole camp, and they built a schoolhouse for the black kids. White school was at Neon, and the black school was here in Fleming. They had teachers, the first teachers were the nuns from over at Jenkins. They taught school here in this building. My mom, she was from Canton, Mississippi, and then they moved up to a place called Hayman, Kentucky. My granddad, he worked coal mines, and then when he started preaching, then he didn't work in the coal mines anymore. My dad came from Spring City, Tennessee. The way they did Elkhorn Coal Company, and they would have, if they had a black man working, and they'd see how good he could work, and then they'd ask him, have you got any brothers or cousins that might want to work? And if they said yeah, and they lived in Alabama or Mississippi, they'd get on the train and they'd go down there and recruit them, you know, more or less, bring them back up here to work. Had a company store, you could get food and clothing, everything from the company store. And they'd had this, what they call script. And my dad would work and my mom would go down to the company store. It's like credit. She would get stuff that would come out of his payday when he got paid. I remember he got his little finger, he got 2 fingers cut off. A buggy run across him and cut off 2 of his fingers. And he got maybe $200 for that. When people would see him and they'd ask him, Clarence, what happened to your fingers? My family ate them fingers off, he'd say, because what money he got went for the family, you know, I mean, to take care of the family.
I'm from Lynch, Kentucky, coal mining area where we worked in the coal mine 30 years. I went in the coal mine in '68. Been a United Mine Worker. I was a mine inspector, and I worked in the mine doing all kind of jobs in the mine. And it wasn't no black, white, it was families going underground away from their loved ones, working together and getting back outside, and don't take no chances underground, because ain't nobody holding that topper but the good Lord. I was a roof boater for 17 or 18 years.
Everybody in Lynch belonged to UMW that worked here. Everybody in Benham had their own another union, not the same. They were in Jenkins and Wheelwright and Pikeville and in Williamsburg, West Virginia, you know, anywhere that they had the United Mine Workers, they had a lot of black coal miners. There's been a lot of people killed right there in this park right out here, because they had to bring National Guards up here in '39 just to stop the war, shooting and killing each other, union and non-union. What I really liked about it then was in the 50s when the thing was segregated. And the United Mine Workers had a slogan like, mining is dangerous. No matter what color you are, we all work together, white and black. So you gotta depend on each other and you get along. So it was good. And then there wasn't no, the black got one pay scale and the white got another pay. They had one pay scale. and that was it. And that was the good part about it, way back in the 50s and the 40s.
Initially, when they started to allow women to go in the coal mine, I kind of remember it was my mother, Ruthie Mae, Kay Francis, Ever Thomas, my sister Drina Smith Thomas, Nita Chapman, Patsy Tinsley. It was a couple white women that went in. All of them went by my mother because she was checking out. Most of them did practically the same thing as the men. I know my sister, if I'm not mistaken, she drove a coal cart. I guess where you get the coal and bring it to the outside and they load it on the trucks and stuff like that. And they cut coal and chiseled and done just like the men.
Ezell Gerard Smith. I'm from Lynch, Kentucky, and now I live in Louisville, Kentucky. We've seen our dads, come in, from working in the mine and just be wore out and everything. And they would always tell us, don't go in the mine, because it kills you. And if you're gonna go in the mine, I'd rather kill you myself. So, but unfortunately, I did go in the mine for about 9 years and something. Luckily, I got out before I could understand what the slow death that they were referring to, black lung and arthritis and all, from being in the dampness, coldness, and breathing in the coal dust. I worked all 3 shifts. The mine ran 24 hours a day. I did everything there was in the mine except for be a boss. Then one day I was what they call pinning top, drilling the top of the mine where you cut the coal out, and then there's slate rock or stone rock. It's just rock. It's nothing you can use in the coal family. So we would have to pin boards or plates or put up timbers so you could advance. And one day just caved in and it pinned me into a piece of machinery. And I was in the hospital for, I can't remember if it was a month, and rehab for about 6 months. And when I went back, I had claustrophobic. You get to understand the sounds. In the mines, when you cut the coal out, and there's nothing there but like just a smooth top, let's say sand rock, you can hear it ripping like paper, or you can hear gas sometimes spewing, and then you can hear and see pieces of rock jagged just shooting down because of the weight, because you haven't put anything there to kind of brace it. There was a lot of rock falls, a lot of cave-ins, a lot of rib rolls, where the sides would just explode due to the weight.
Bernie Bickerstaff, from Benham, Kentucky, and I live in Washington, D.C. now. Well, I remember the community nurturing. I remember fairness. I remember the competitiveness. I remember the rivalries that blossomed into, indelible friendships and mutual respect.
They went out and hired workers based on their athletic ability. Willie Watts told us that the way he got to Lynch was that his father was hired because he was a good hitter and could play infield very well. And in reviewing old company records, personnel records, we found some that were termination notices in a file. Could not hit, was not a good fielder. So these people were let go because they were hired not to work in the mines, but for their athletic ability.
The leagues, the recreation leagues, were segregated by race, but these folks scrimmaged against each other to make each other better, because the pride of the whole town was riding on the success of either a black or a white team or both teams.
The sports life here in Lynch. Look around these walls, you see all kinds of photos of high school sports. Took a lot of pride as being a pirate. Growing up, you envied and admired the older guys who were already playing sports, and look forward to the day that you could don the blue and gold.
One thing about U.S. Steel, if you were a good student and a good athlete, they looked out for you. The kids in Eastern Kentucky, the reason they got to be so good, nobody was gonna pick you on their team if you couldn't play, if you wasn't good. Everybody tried to be the best they could. People from Jenkins and Hazard and Millsboro, you know, all these other cities that we used to compete against, and now we all buddy-buddy and we talk about old times. And
that area where we grew up, they knew how to raise their young, and you weren't only disciplined at home, but you were disciplined, you know, in the community if you got out of line. And I've always felt before the book came out on how to raise a child, you know, it was done in the Tri-Cities area.
Everybody knew everybody and still know everybody. Even coming back home with your kids, people don't know the kids, but they can see them. Oh, that's a Smith, or that's a Clark, or that's a Ward, or that's a, you know, that's a Snow, you know. Everybody know who you are, even if they don't know you personally.
I live now in Louisville, Kentucky, by way of Lynch, Kentucky. As a kid, I can remember many things. Best place in the world to have been raised as a kid. The connection we had with each other, family looking after family, children had free hand to play without fear. Lynch itself was basically owned separate but equal type of a situation. And we all lived in different camps, like from Camp 1 to Camp 7. We all had our own little area. We had, like, for example, for recreation in Camp 2, what they call a boarding house, where most people attended that for parties, etc. A lot of men stayed at the boarding house. Then the number one spot that I usually identify home away from home was the pool room. And there you had top floor for like the Masonic fraternity having meetings. And then we had the pool tables downstairs, which were all people in Lynch mostly came to the pool room. So that was the hot spot for a lot of things.
Growing up in Benham, it was a segregated community. And we black folk lived in the eastern part of Benham. Everything that was dirty was in the black community. The coal mines on the mountainsides, on the North Mountain side, as well as the South Mountain side, were in Benham. The coal dump, where they pile coal up and sometimes 3 and 4, 5 stories high, was in the black community, where the coal cars were repaired and made all of the noise and the dust and the dirt was in the black community. The bathhouses, there were 2 bathhouses, one for whites and one for the blacks. My father worked in the coal mine with the white coal miners, and when he came from the coal mines, he went to the left to go home, and they would go to the right to go home. And that's how that system, that environment was set up. The clean facilities in Benham were in the white community, such as the company store. The International Harvester Company owned the big store, the department store in Benham, and they owned the meat market in Benham. Tennessee Ernie Ford sang the song, I Owe My Soul to the Company Store. My daddy did. And they were taking money from his paycheck every week, but they still would not allow him at times to charge things on that company charge account. When I was approximately 4 years old, I remember being in the meat market with my mother. And every time that a white person would come into the store, my mother was pushed back from being served she told me that she had to wait her turn, and her turn did not come until after all of the white people in the store had been waiting on. There was a theater. The Isaac family owned the theaters in Cumberland, Benham, and Lynch. Now, blacks could not go to the Isaac's Theater in Cumberland, Kentucky. We could go to the theater in Benham, Kentucky, and we could go to the theater in Lynch, Kentucky.
All of Harlan County, I had something to do in it, job related. Being in Everett's, Black Mountain, Putney, Home, Wallace Creek, Smith, which is some of the uglier places, Smith, Wallace Creek, and places like that, they would always try me first. And I would always just be there, standing toe to toe.
Jerome Ratchford, and of course I'm from southeastern Kentucky, specifically Lynch, Kentucky, Harlan County. My wife and I, we've been living in Atlanta, Georgia, almost 40 years now. My father was from Talladega, Alabama, and my mother, which is somewhat of an exception, was from Louisiana. Even when I talk about segregation, and we did live in a segregated community, it wasn't, I can say this because professionally, I moved south and I got a chance to see some of the rudiments of strict segregation. I wouldn't classify Lynch as having strict segregation. For example, I don't remember seeing a separate water fountain for blacks and whites in Lynch. First time I saw that was if I went to the county seat or something of that sort. But in terms of looking white people in the face and being fearful of consequences, very tragic consequences, if you didn't honor certain kinds of codes, we didn't grow up with that kind of rigidity and so forth. White communities and black communities floated together pretty easily on certain lines of demarcation and so forth. But there were some signs, a lot of signs of segregation as well. You know, from an employment perspective, while they all went into those mines and went to the same depth, there was disparities in terms of hiring and who could become a supervisor, et cetera, and what have you.
So if we kind of look at this on a generational arc, you had from 1910 to about 1940, the black population in Harlan County alone goes from 2% to 10%.
The percentage of black residents in neighboring eastern Kentucky counties also peaked around 1940, the height of the region's coal mining.
But between 1940 and 1970, Harlan County lost 70% of its black population. The mines were starting to close down, and the mining industry was racialized like all other labor. Who did they lay off first? Black folks. You gotta go. This not only impacted men who were currently employed in the mines, but it was very clear that there would be no job opportunities for their children. So all adults in the community really embraced instilling in their kids from a very young age, you have to be not only prepared to leave this place, but you have to be prepared to compete in an integrated society, which is something that none of them had ever done. At the same time, the African American Great Migration is booming, right? Black folks are moving from all over the South. They're leaving from Georgia and Alabama. What these Kentucky black folks' parents had done a generation ago, it's starting to uptick in like a huge way in the South. They're going straight from Bessemer to New York City, straight to DC, straight to Detroit, and you know, that's where the jobs were at that time. Well, you go back up to the mountain where my mom and dad were growing up. Where did they go for the summers when they were on vacation? To visit those very cousins who might have been originally from Alabama, who had migrated to Cleveland, who had migrated earlier to New York, and they go visit them for the summers. What does that do? It plants a seed. When I grow up, I'm moving to New York. That's what my father did. That's how my brother and I, came to be born and raised in New York, but their migration story is very emblematic of how it kind of unfolded for many families during that generation of the out-migration, which really started around your 1940s, 50s, and 60s. You've got cousins or aunts or uncles, sisters or brothers clustered in a particular city, it becomes a natural kind of transition for you to migrate there too, because your family will help you get set up. You can live there for a little while until you find a job. So that is the way in which the majority of folks migrated. But there were some other cool patterns. One was the integration of the military.
Right after the war, work had got real slack. I was working like 3 days a week. I didn't see where I was getting ahead like that. And then in the 50s, the Korean War broke out, and they had just integrated the service, the black and white. Marine recruiting sergeant heard there was some good athletes up in here, so he showed up here, recruited me to go in the Marine Corps to play basketball. So I went into boot camp.
So the integration of the United States military really served as symbolically as a opening of a new window of opportunity or possibility for the way that black men thought about what their life pathway might be. And that really created a new kind of migratory structure as well. And that is how many folks who ended up out west did so through the military.
And I had a choice of joining the military, working in a coal mine, and or going to another city where you might have had a relative to go and get employment, like Chicago, Cleveland, etc. I joke a lot. I did not have anyone to invite me for that particular time, so my choice was to join the Air Force in 1960. Leaving Lynch, and I think my first place was going to Louisville, Kentucky, where I reside now. And that was just like another world and everything. And even beyond that is once in the military, going to San Antonio, Texas, that was something that you read about, I thought, you know.
Right after the Second World War, we had 4,000 or 5,000 people working here in the mine. Then you getting all this automated equipment, they start cutting down. They cut down to about 12 to 1,500. They didn't need all those people. So the people that were leaving here, some had family in roots here, they would go to Cleveland, Detroit, and places like that, automobile places, steel mills up there, and get jobs.
Well, some went to Cleveland, some went to New York, New Jersey, Louisiana. And my sister, when she got out of high school, she went to Indianapolis and stayed with the Wrights, and she got a job, and she got an apartment. Then she sent for the next oldest, Cardell. She goes up there and she gets her a job. Then Janice, the next one, did. And my brother Casey, he went there, and we all stayed at my sister's house. That's how most of my family got to Indianapolis. But I haven't left. Here in Fleming, there's 2 black families now. Used to, you sit and people walked up and down the street all the time. Now you don't see anybody, And Bishop Lamb, Church of God, it's MPGOT, Militant Pillar and Ground of Truth. They're the only black church in Mac Roberts, and then this is one in Fleming. And there's no more around till you get to Pikeville, and there's 2 black churches in Pikeville.
Our church, the Rising Star Baptist Church, and it still sits on the mountainside in Benham, Kentucky right now. On the 1st and the 3rd Sunday of each month, the Baptists would have access to the church. On the 2nd and 4th Sundays, the Methodists would have access to the church. But every Sunday, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we all went to church together anyway. It's been about 5 or 6 years since that we had a service on a Memorial Day weekend at the Rising Star Baptist Church. There just aren't enough black people now living in Benham, Kentucky.
My dad, he moved to Cleveland, and he worked in a steel mill. And after my 9th grade year, he moved all of the family there to Cleveland. When we left Kentucky, we had the Greyhound bus. And at that time, it was still very segregated. All the blacks had to sit in the back. And I never will forget that it was halfway to Cleveland, and my mother couldn't get off the bus to get us water or anything because they had no place for the blacks to go get water. And we wanted water. So it started to rain, and it rained so hard that she let the window down, and she got water in an envelope until we had enough water to drink, because we wasn't privy enough to go into the bus station where she could have purchased everything that we needed. My husband's sister, we was best friends in Kentucky. And when he came home from the military, that's when I met him. He was from Benham, Kentucky.
You just really entered into a different world when you stepped out. And when we left Benham, we were prepared, you know, for hard times. We were well taught, our teachers were really good. We were fundamentally sound, you know, with things that stick with us now, that's there, and you look back and you marvel at the abilities of our teachers who were relatively young, because they would come up from Kentucky State and Knoxville College, and it would be their first jobs.
City life wasn't for me. We thought Eastern Kentucky was poor, and I had never seen a poor person. But when I seen someone eating out the garbage in the city and walking around with no shoes, now we walk around with no shoes because we saving our shoes, but just, it was winter time one time. And
a lot of them just went straight to the military. A lot of my uncles that are from there, after they went to the military, they ended up in different cities. Some of them stayed and made the military their career. They all ended up in Springfield, Massachusetts. There my parents met because my dad was in the military, and so that's how, and he was from St. Louis, so that's how I ended up in St. Louis, and my mother.
I went the opposite direction of what black people were doing from a migratory perspective back in that particular time. They were still migrating to the Detroits, to Cleveland, especially if you were in Kentucky. Once I got my degree, I realized that I wanted to go south. I particularly wanted to work at a historically black college and university, and the ones that had tradition and for me to have choices. So that's where I went. And so my first position in higher education was at a small school, liberal arts school in Alabama called Talladega College. I knew that the South was going to be my base, even though I went back to the Midwest to get a degree, and so I got a position at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and then subsequently at Kennesaw State University in Marietta, Georgia.
Bernard Bickerstaff went to school and graduated from East Benham High School, went off to college and played basketball, to play pro ball, and he's right now involved in the NBA. We're so proud of him. And the beauty of that, he does not stick his chest out and say, I am thus and such, and et cetera, et cetera. He's a very humble, gentle person. And all of us love him. All of us love him. And there's nothing he can do about it.
I went to Cleveland. I ended up going to Rio Grande College, University in Ohio, for a year and a half, and then drove out to San Diego with a friend from Cleveland. Then it all started from there. I attended University of San Diego, coached at University of San Diego, and then on to the National Basketball Association. Even leaving Kentucky, you were still around your friends and your relatives. So although I left Benham, it was the same people. It was a big city, they were the same people.
A lot of my husband's friends was in Cleveland, and we would always get together on Sundays or Saturdays or holidays you know, eat together and have fun together. And they said, you know what, everybody is scattered, so we need to see if we can have a little reunion. Let's get together and see how many people we can get. And our first reunion, we didn't send out no literature or anything. It was about word of mouth. We had this hall, and the hall was named Shaker Lee Hall. And the hall would only hold about 300 people. But we had no idea. My husband's friends kept coming, calling to Cleveland, said, we're coming up, we're coming up. They stayed in different people's homes. I had so many people at my house, I had to send my kids to my mother. We couldn't get the people in there. Over 1,000 people showed up. And we were all from Kentucky. And I never will forget, that night, I was so dressed up, I thought I was so pretty. I had my hair done that day. When I got in that hall, my hair said, shoop. It was so hot in that place. You couldn't breathe. They overflowed in the parking lot, on the sidewalks, because you couldn't get people in there. This was the first time we tried it. We didn't really branch out to chapters until about the second reunion. Some of the people from Detroit says, well, since you all had a get together, we're going to have it in Detroit next year. And then after Detroit, I think we went to Chicago. And it just started building from that. We have had at least about 15 chapters, and now we're down to about 12. We have California, Texas, Kentucky, Atlanta.
The Atlanta chapter was started in 1966. My husband, Garfield Guest, started the reunion. Before we had our first reunion, the Lynch chapter came to Atlanta and brought all of their members and families. It just impressed me very much to see them, how they organized it. Most of the organizations consist of a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, a business manager. Some might have a parliamentarian. We also have bylaws that we go by.
I'm from Lynch, Kentucky, and now I live in Benham, Kentucky. The social club started, and I was actually just graduating from high school, which my father and uncle and all had started the Lynch chapter. So there was Jenkins, Will Wright, Mac Roberts, all those people were from over in that end of the country. So I was recruited right out of high school to be the secretary of the Lynch chapter, where I served as secretary and then as a vice president for 33 years. If you wanted to be a new chapter for the Eastern Kentucky Social Club, there's, if you're originally from Eastern Kentucky, you could even be married into a family of somebody that was originally from Eastern Kentucky. You'll go to our executive board meetings and ask to host a reunion. That's where the executive board, we vote and see if you're ready to host a reunion. And then actually my niece, which was in Knoxville, decided they would like to have a club, so I helped them establish a new chapter in Knoxville, Tennessee. It consists of a lot of young people. It's a young chapter.
And we kept saying we have to get our youth engaged and we need new chapters, young blood. And I said, hey, why don't we just start a chapter in St. Louis? And right now we're seeing the first fruits of that. We are hosting our very first reunion.
I'm just so pleased to say the book is finally here, y'all. This is our book.
I have the privilege of serving as a co-president of the SACA, which is the Southeastern Kentucky Heritage Association.
Even though the organization was called the Eastern Kentucky Social Club, our chapter is called SACA because we wanted to bring in a more heritage feel to get history on the different coal miners and where they came from. What did they do? How did they migrate?
We really wanted to emphasize what we thought was the true essence of what Eastern Kentucky is about, the social club. So we took social out and made ours heritage. The St. Louis chapter uses heritage and what have you, and that's really what it's about.
Now, to show you, see that picture right there? That's in Hartford, Connecticut in '83. There were 2,000 people at that dinner that night for our reunion. Most of the city's crowd wasn't quite that big, but they would be from 1,500 up to close to 2,000, just about all of them.
In the early years, kids didn't attend. You know, they would have a bus out here in the schoolyard, they'd get on the bus, you know, they suitcases, and they would go from city to city every year to have the Kentucky reunion. My first real reunion was in Indianapolis, and that was in 1978. When I graduated from high school, I had my own room and everything, so at that time, I'm adult, I'm in the mix of everything. You know, I got my own room, I'm a part of the reunion. It's been in Dayton, Detroit, Milwaukee, Chicago, Lexington, Louisville, Connecticut, Cleveland, Indianapolis, Georgia. It's been in St. Louis, Memphis, Nashville.
A lot of kids aren't exposed to going to all these different cities when they're young, so I was grateful for the exposure.
I guess the reunion plays a couple of roles. One, it brings everybody together. And then there are planned social events. You have discos, you have a formal dinner, dance, you have a speaker who's usually astute and eloquent and articulate, who can bring you a message that's based on our upbringing and relevant to today's life.
And it entails a lot of work, but it also brings in a lot of revenue to these cities that we go into. They have fun and they enjoy the cities, and they spend their hard-earned money. When I tell people, you know, friends that, hey, yeah, I'm going to this reunion, it's been 49 years, they're in awe. But the one thing I think that's important, there's a transition coming. And somehow we have to entice the younger generation to get more involved so they can carry this legacy on.
I could see us dying out if we don't get our kids, our grandkids into the reunions. We've got to pull them in, but we've got to pull them in, letting them do their thing.
I can speculate that this is one of the longest standing African American organizations that's just solely based on social purposes that has gone on for 50 years nearly. That is a huge accomplishment, but it also has a life course. And we're at the tail end of that. What I hope is that folks who are in the next generation step up and take leadership roles in the organization, that we bring our ideas and really invest ourselves in carrying the mantle.
And I like to see that before I pass on, because that's what it's all about. That's what God put us here, to work together as one. The young people got a new way of doing this, and we need to get them involved and let them pick up the torch and go ahead on with it.
I come back here every Memorial Day. It's my fix that I get, that gets me ready to go the rest of the year, because I get here and I spend so much time with my friends and see people.
I was experiencing lynch post-high school for about 3 years. And I say that to say this. So I kind of witnessed, and I'm not just me singly, but I sort of witnessed some of the decimation that occurred in lynch over time. And I remember when we got into the seemingly the 1970s and so forth, people were not coming home any longer for Christmas.
Home itself now is hard to visualize the way it was because the way things has deteriorated over the years. The homes, some burned, torn down, etc. So it's a little bit different now than it was even 15, 20 years ago.
There being a history with the building here, this was the old black school, and my uncle Sylvester Baskin actually went to, U.S. Steel came from St. Louis, and him and I went to a meeting and actually purchased the building for $1. So that's how we got this building. And
it's the only EKSC building we own.
The Eastern Kentucky Social Club has kept our history alive. And you know, any unit that loses its history, that's catastrophic.
I think that was key for me as a young kid, that my parents, their stories, they loved the area. They always share the history with us. Like my daughter, I share with her now. She knows what lynch is. She knows the community. Even though she hasn't been there, she wrote a poem and she said, you know, I'm a descendant of lynch, just because it's something that's important to us. We plan on continuing on with the heritage and the traditions of Eastern Kentucky, even though we don't live there, is very much alive in our hearts.
The Eastern Kentucky Social Club was made possible through the support of Open Society Foundations and by viewers like you. Thank you.